Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to see this. And thanks, James, for explaining basically all of the amazing features in the Notable that I like. I've been using Notable for 2 years now, basically to do all of my teaching. So what I'll talk you through, I'll try to make it brief, but I'm a talker. I'll talk to you a bit of a context in which, with which I'm coming at it. I'll talk about my need for no drama coding environment, which Notable is winning in. I'll talk about giving feedback. So James showed us all the examples of how it works. I'll try to talk a little bit about the practice of it. I'll talk about managing files, because at the end of the day, that can be a source of jarring. UX of teaching is just something I'm passionate about the sort of seamless flow of, how we deliver the education. And finally, I'll talk about life beyond, before and after Notable, which I think is a very important part of every software tool. And again, I really like how this platform is approaching it. Let's do this. First, I'll tell a little bit about the context that I'm coming from. You probably know what this creature is. But the idea is that there were 20 years between these two Pikachus, and every single of the 15 games that were between them were quite important. So for me, it's important that this is where I came from. Prior to teaching at Edinburgh University, I taught at CodeClan, which is a small sort of semi-charity coding school within Edinburgh. And these were my cohorts. It was just 20 students. I could walk between the rooms as they're coding along. Notice that every student is given the same type of laptop, which is going to be important in a minute. So everybody's coding environment is identical, because literally we gave them the same MacBook. An experience of coding in this school was, it was basically always 2 students working on one computer, just passing the computer around. And that was very, very important, where they basically took turns typing and explaining what to do, and sort of asking questions and answering questions and thinking out loud. Because as anyone who've coded, so you all probably know about it, this is typing. Programming happens in your head. Programming happens on a whiteboard. So most of the environment that I'm used to creating for my students is this, where one student is typing hooked up to a projector, while everyone else is discussing things, doodling on whiteboards, and just sort of creating a solution. Now, this was my first day at Edinburgh University, where I walked into a massive programming lab, where suddenly, luckily, again, every computer is the same. Every computer has the same environment. And on day one, every computer was running Notable, which was fantastic. But also what would have happened, these students would, take part in my few hours of computer lab, and then they go home and they try to do the same exercises on their laptops. And I'll talk to you a little bit about the drama that comes inherently with the fact that suddenly you have 20 different types of machines, and students trying to do the same exercises that they have done during the lesson on their machines, and how much of a pain this was before Notable sort of rolled up at the scene. So currently what I'm using Notable for, this is my sort of context. I'm teaching 2 big courses at business school. They're both basically intro to programming, one focusing on the Python applications and one focusing on sort of business usage. We're delivering 2 things with Edinburgh Futures Institute. One is a bootcamp that just sort of takes 2 or 3 days, and one is an incoming UG course. And on Azure Institute, which is part of DDI, I think, also we're designing an incoming PG course. The nice thing is, suddenly all of these courses are using the same platform. I can share some notes between them, and I'll mention about my philosophy of sharing notes and how Notable is enabling that. Yeah, I'll mention a few bits as we go along. So now I'll talk a little bit about the no drama environment. I don't know if any of you had experience of being tech support on a student course, where suddenly, you could have 30 students, you could have 300 students, and each of them have a slightly different computer. Some of them don't even have a computer, as in they would use their iPad Pro or Chromebook, which are web browsing devices to complete university courses. So suddenly, you can forget about this dream of just giving every student a MacBook. You can forget about this dream of everyone having the same experience. And even if you give them the same experience within the computer lab, like we do in the uni, suddenly they go home. So having experience of them just logging in through the learning environment and having all of their notes and all of their stuff in one place, looking exactly the same, using exactly the same files, is magic. It really feels like magic, and you do not waste first 3 weeks of your course, being tech support. Yeah, which literally was the life. I'm luckily arrived at the scene sort of just after Notable, but I hear horror stories from all of my colleagues. Another thing I will mention is that as a student as well, not just as an instructor, you have some admin rights on the Notable. So it's safe, sandboxed environment where theoretically you could install stuff that you want to do. You can run terminal scripts and shells, which means that a lot of stuff that normally there will be blockers. Right now, you can do it with your students, and you can ask your students to do it. And at the same time, it's sandbox, so they're not going to do any damage. And I think every few hours, the whole thing comes back to normal. So just to repeat, this is what I wanted to achieve. I wanted literally every student to have their own device that is identical as every other student's device, but on a cloud. And that's where Notable came really handy. This is one of my favorite bits, where basically per notebook basis, you can ensure that all students have the same sort of laptop, the same device. Basically all of my notebooks would start with this very top cell where I tell students, just run this as you're reading the first few sentences, and it downloads everything they need for this particular notebook. Which means that, on some courses, I'm teaching text mining. In other courses, I'm teaching web, sort of scraping and analytics. Other courses is visualization and graphs. And obviously for all of these things, you need different libraries. Indeed, but in Notable and with Jupyter's that I'm using as the main tool here, you can literally see the pip bit. You can literally run terminal commands from your notebook. So the power of that is you don't have suddenly 100 students copy pasting terminal commands into their terminals. By the way, Notable gives students access to the terminal. So this sort of black and white matrix-like inner coding environment. So they have, all the power, but you can do all these things from your notebook, which is magical. It basically means that, you can forget about first 3 weeks of setup, and you can just get students, coding within seconds, literally, which is magical. Another bit that I really like is giving feedback to students. So I'll talk briefly about giving feedback inside of your notes, giving feedback as they're coding. So basically, meaningful error messages. And there's also a bit that James showed really nicely, the marking stuff, the NB grader, the built-in sort of automatic and then manual marking flow. I will not talk about them. I'll just mention how I use them. And also delivering feedback to the students, so that HTML file that James showed us. So this is just an example of a notebook. And if you want to read it more, you can just watch the video later and pause and read. But basically, notice this blue bit here. Click here to see the answer, but really, really please try to do it yourself. So when a student clicks that bit, they sort of see the answer hidden within the notes. So notice, we are not even coding yet. This is just hiding little messages in your notebooks. And that's one thing you can sort of put in there. And it's not a core feature of Jupyter Notebook, but with some, Googling and with some craftiness, you can shape it to be whatever you want it to be. So you can leave sort of little breadcrumbs and things for your students. Again, bunches of code. If you want to understand them a bit better, just pause the video. But it's an example of an assignment. It's an example of what I'm giving to my students. There's a function, return just the city names when I give you results from an API about Scottish cities. And, I explain to them what they need to do. So the red stuff is just a comment for the students. And then there's a gap. Hey, dear participant, dear student, just go and write what you want to do. So Again, pile of code. But what I want to show you is this exactly the thing that James showed a minute ago. At the end of the day, you can set up scenarios for students. So if these are cities we're talking about, obviously the most important cities out there, then what I expect to get is Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Inverness. So write my code, or sorry, run my code and just assert that what I expected is the thing I wanted. In a different scenario where the whole world is just two Edinburghs, well, I just want two Edinburghs, and whether expected is the actual. Why I'm showing this to you is because suddenly as an instructor, as a teacher, you get to choose how much of that you're showing to your students. So, normally what I'm giving to my students, it's something like this. They see an empty function that they need to write, and they see one or many tests, like where I'm actually able to explain to my students, with this input, and when you run the function, I expect a given output. But what we see as, I think I broke my slide, but basically what you've seen in James's is like, you also have a bunch of hidden tests, which is very meaningful, because obviously then students don't over optimize to just achieve what they wanted to achieve. Why I'm showing this to you, when you're creating a markable assignment, and for me this is a big thing that you need to get right when you want teaching to be pleasant. When you're creating markable assignments, you can give certain pointage to different tests. So if the test, if it works, if it checks if it's fine, that can be worth 10 points. But if you're writing 3 or 4 more tests, which are checking whether it works in particular very edge cases, they can be worth less points. So again, you're sort of automating the whole process. So when I'm teaching a course of 100 students, marking all of their assignments, takes minutes. If I wrote them well. So there's a whole challenge of you actually spend quite a lot of time writing good assignments, but then marking is quite straightforward. So you assign points to tests, which is quite smart and beautiful. And I really like how that's solved. You can have sort of hand-marked elements, like manually marked parts, assignment, and then the notable, the NB grader dashboard just shows you, oh, you still need to mark this and this and this. And when you're done, it sort of calculates all the points for you, so you can export that. Finally, I really like how it gives feedback to students, because then when I release all the feedback, I just write my students an email saying, hey, these are the most common mistakes you've made. These are the most common awesome things you've done. Go log into Noteable and have a look individually, sort of what's out there. Next big thing that really makes it for me is managing files. So obviously you can just upload and download files. There's an upload button, which can be nice, but it can become very quickly very dramatic, especially when we're talking about data as well. When I have a folder with 20 text files for the text mining course, and I want students to upload it. So it works, but luckily, GitHub to the rescue. You can basically, with one button, clone and pull repositories. So one button cloning, that's lovely. And that's something that James has showed. But really, the magic comes from one button pulling. So, say I already pulled that repo with my notes as a student. I'm pulling repo with lecture notes. And then, next week, the lecturer releases next pile of notes into the same repo. So as a student, I'm using the same button, the same URL of the Git repo, and it will just top me up. It will just add all the nodes that weren't here last week, and now they are there. So this was I've been using that particular feature for 2 years, and it's brilliant. It just really makes distributing your notes incredibly useful, down to the point and when halfway through the computer lab, I realized I actually forgot to put some sort of data file, or there was an error in one of my notebooks. I can just push the new version into the GitHub, and I tell students, hey everyone, just click the clone button, and they get immediately the new notes. When you want to compare that with asking suddenly 100 students to download and upload and manage their own files, that's beautiful. And if someone really wants to do the full Git flow, so for those of you who know what Git is, then you probably know what Git flow is. You actually want students to add and commit and push and merge and branch and all that shebang. you can also do it in the terminal. That's part of sort of this Notable platform, and that's quite beautiful. I spoke a little bit about sandbox admin rights, that you as a student, you can actually do some useful stuff. And I'll talk about two beautiful hacks that I am using in my teaching. And while they aren't core features of Notable, they do enable me to do sort of my education the way I wanna. And also the installing packages right from the notebooks, which is that thing I showed you before, you know, where you can just on the top of notebooks say, okay, this notebook is using this and that. By the way, run this terminal command to get some stuff, download this particular folder from some internet repository. It's just incredibly useful. Like suddenly it's like a plug and play learning notes, which are live and are interactive. It's brilliant, and it really saves time. The next bit, and I saw that James showed exactly what is what here, so I'm going to skip a slide or two. But the sort of user experience of teaching and learning is with the Notable, and especially when it's combined with your virtual learning environment, it's quite beautiful. To begin with, what I really like is that when you enter Notable through your VLE, the Notable knows which class you entered in from as a student. So say and in business school, there's actually quite a lot of students who would do at the same time 2 or 3 different courses, like different modules, each using Notable. So when I enter Notable from Python programming course, I only see assignments from Python programming. But as a student, if I leave Notable and enter again through web analytics, I only see assignments from web analytics that are relevant to me. And this is brilliant because when suddenly I'm using weekly assignments, that list can become very unruly. And when the second semester, fifth semester, and suddenly the sort of amount of assignment would become very unruly, while this is really prettily and cleanly solved. That bit where students within seconds, like within a minute, I expect students to just be able to start coding, which is quite nice. I'll talk a tiny bit about pair programming, which is my personal geek. This is just something that I absolutely love, and I can imagine teaching without it. But also I'll talk about how Notable enables it, and how it makes it possible for me to deliver the classes that I want to, the classes that I'm used to from, especially now remotely, that I'm used to from, teaching in the classroom, that now, it's quite a smooth transition. Right, so this is something that James already showed, that within Notable, we just have this, within my learning environment, I have this link, and as a student, I click the link, I see my notes, but also I can click assignments, and that sort of opens my assignments, but just for this module, which is brilliant. It just really makes the experience of, like, I don't need to worry about making, once or even twice a week a tiny assignment, because I know that it's not going to mess with other lecturers teaching. Coming back to this picture, this is 2 of my students working on their daily homework together. So what they're doing is they're pair programming, pair like 2 humans. And what happens is they pass around the laptop, right? And this is sort of how the philosophy of pair programming works. The person who's typing on the keyboard is called the driver, like in a car. They're sort of driving and, pressing all the buttons, turning the wheel, pressing the pedals. Driving a car is complicated. And the other person is the navigator, the equivalent of a person holding the map and looking right and left, looking out for danger, but also explaining and sometimes entertaining you with a chat. So what would happen in sort of my previous teaching, what actually happens is you might have heard about rubber duck debugging, is this idea that if you are missing a person to talk to, just put like a small rubber duck on your desk and explain your code to them. So this other person basically is a sounding board for your thoughts, and it becomes a conversation. Creating code becomes a conversation between them. And as you can see in this pretty picture, every 10 minutes they switch who's coding. So now visualize this, right? When they can just pass around the keyboard or pass around the computer. I want to do this online. Suddenly I want two students to be able to share code, to work together on one code, remotely while being on a video call at the same time, which sort of looks like this. And without it, I couldn't have delivered my courses over the last 2 years. And suddenly it turns out that this is quite possible or notable. It takes a tiny bit of terminal magic, but it's out there. And again, because the system is so flexible, this was my particular need, but I imagine that whatever your particular need for your particular teaching is, that can also be achieved. I'll now, to finish, I think this is almost me done. I'll tell you about a tiny bits of solutions that you can build on top of Notable, because again, tool is a tool, right? It's lovely that it's there, but at the end of the day, we're using tools so that we can deliver the things that we dreamed up, and we can deliver sort of the experiences that we want to deliver. So I'll give you an example of something quite big and dramatic that I could have delivered because this was in place. I'll mention a little bit the extreme customizing, and I'll mention a little bit afterlife, because a good software is taking care of you even when you're offline, or even when you stop using it, or even when you leave to another organization which doesn't have a subscription to that particular thing. And everyone who had all of their code or all of their video files in Premiere, and suddenly is moving somewhere who doesn't have subscription to Premiere knows what I'm talking about. You suddenly, find yourself losing everything, and that's not kind. So I really like how this works within Notable. So I'll mention that. This is what I really like, that the idea, that the good tool just gives you opportunity to assemble whatever you want. And I can imagine roughly how I would assemble this. But I don't want to be forced to do it. So this is one solution that I built thanks to Notable, and thanks to the way that Jupyter notebooks are very, very plug and play. When I'm teaching, I'm using something called a badge. And the idea is that the badge is one piece of skill, is one piece of knowledge that the student gains. To achieve a badge, or sort of to gain it, student watches sort of 20 minutes of video. They go through a notebook that contains a bunch of Cody examples that they expand on, and then they go through a separate notebook, which is a test, and that's built with those automatic testing things that James had showed us a minute ago. And then each student writes like a 3-sentence reflective bit or a mini diary. But I've been using this sort of philosophy over the last 2 years, and I've accumulated a pile of badges that now I can assemble new courses from, or add bits to courses, or give them as optional side quests to my students. But the reason that this is so simple, and the reason all of them are running in the same environment, all of them, like I sort of assume that every student from Edinburgh Uni has access to Notable, which they do. So suddenly I can just, I don't need to worry, oh, do they have subscription to this or the other? I don't need to worry if they, will have that particular library installed. I just know that it's going to fly. So example of how I'm delivering a course is, for example, this is a week. They get 5 badges to do, and they get this pair programming 2-hour sort of lab together. And so 3-week block is 2 of these sort of badge programming blobs, and then their pair homework. And then what happens, this is the whole course. So this is like 20 credit, 11-week course, where they basically do a bunch of badges, assignment, and then their exam at the end. Notice this has nothing to do with Notable sensu stricta, but without this infrastructure, I couldn't have delivered this. I couldn't have designed things like that. So going back here, the extreme customizing is the bit where is the little hack that enables my students to share their sort of Notable files between each other, so they can pair program. Another bit of extreme customizing is, for example, my admin staff, who, by the way, are amazing. They really wanted me to share with them these HTMLs with student feedback. That students get, the ones that once I generate feedback, that each student has access to it. So, in sort of 20 minutes, I could write a quick shell script which emailed all of these HTML files to my admin team, so the admin team could generate feedback for external examiners or something. Like basically, because effectively your Notable server, so as you're running your Notable, is like your virtual laptop that you can do whatever on, that suddenly means that you can use it for its basic functions, but also if you're so inclined and if you particularly have these skills, you can do some magic within it. What I like about Afterlife, and this is a bit that I was wondering, like for me, this is important. All the things that you host on Notable, including your assignments, it's built on top of an open source project. So suddenly, when you leave to another organization, or when you going on holiday, when we finally go on holiday again, you want to take your notes with you, and say you're offline or you're on a train. All of the notes, all of the files, or of the Jupyter notebooks, they will also be supported by other platforms, by other projects. So you're not like locked into this infrastructure. You're not locked into this system, which for me is a huge selling point. And that's why any minute I'll take the notables auto grading over, say, Code Runner, which is brilliant, but there's no way to export your stuff. Like, you're locked with them for life. So yeah, I think this is basically, this was a very quick rundown of my experiences of using Notable. But what I wanted to focus on is, I'll try to stop sharing my screen. Stop share. There we go. What I really tried to focus on is that it takes away so much friction. So then us as educators, we can focus on doing the stuff that we're here to do, teach. So it's beautiful, and it was really good experience to work within small groups of students and larger courses, sharing things and notes between me and my teaching assistants. That was really good. A tiny detail that was really lovely is that for whatever reason, sometimes your student, for example, is sent to you. Some of them would be sort of full-time undergrad or postgrad students, but you might have a student who's sent to you by NHS or by some external company, right? And what happens, they have their work laptop on which they have no admin rights. They wouldn't be able to install anything. They wouldn't be able to install even Python often. So suddenly it becomes a really valuable thing where even people who, for whatever political, work, safety, or technology reasons, they cannot install stuff, suddenly that just stops being a worry, because these people, these students, they can just click a button, enter Notable, and suddenly they have access to everything, which when we experimented with delivering some of these educational resources to Scottish government, they said literally that was their selling point. So I know that we're all in full-time university education, but at the same time the landscape is constantly changing, and you don't want to be locked in to something that can only happen within your campus. So this was quite cool. Thank you for letting me talk. As I warned you, I'm a talker, but I tried to show you as many examples of things that I think are awesome about this platform. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing, almost every 2 months they come up with something new for me. So this is nice. I'm looking forward to the next semester where I get to work with it again. Thanks for having me, James.
Thank you so much, Pawel. That was excellent in providing such an expansive overview of some applications in Notable. Loved how you made mention of both its usability for smaller courses and for larger courses, and that was a really fascinating description of how it's been useful to you. So thank you very much, Pawel.